Hi everyone, my name is Julie if you're new here, and I like to share old-fashioned recipes that are simple but taste amazing. Today I'm sharing my family's old-fashioned Norwegian Lefse recipe. Lefse, if you've never had it, it's a sweet Norwegian flatbread. I hesitate to call it like a tortilla because it's so tender. It has potatoes in it, and it's just slightly sweet. We love it during the holidays, but we also have it throughout the year. And I have some tips to share with you to make your lefse rolling very easy and also for storing it for later to enjoy. So we'll get into making those right now. The night before I plan to make my lefse, I prepare my potatoes so that everything's ready to go the next day. To begin with, we need 5 pounds of russet potatoes. You have quite a few potatoes for this batch of lefse, so I like to soak them in water while I peel them so that they don't get any brown spots on them. While you're peeling, be sure you remove any eyes or blemishes from your potatoes. To cook your potatoes on the stovetop, just dice them into even-sized pieces and place them in a medium saucepan covered with water and boil them until they are fork tender. If you're an Instant Pot or pressure cooker fan, you can cut your peeled potatoes into golf ball sized chunks and place them on the trivet with 1 cup of water, and you'll cook them on high pressure for 5 minutes. Quick release the pressure and drain. While your potatoes are still hot, you'll rice them with your potato ricer. This step is key to getting smooth, lump-free dough later. I've shared this tip in the past, but you can also use a cheese grater or a mesh strainer to rice your potatoes. It's very important that they're riced really well. Add 1/2 cup of butter to your riced potatoes and continue to rice the hot potatoes over them so that the butter will melt and it's easier to mix later on. Mix everything so that it's well combined and the butter is melted. Pat your warm, riced, and buttered potatoes into a 9 by 13 inch pan. You'll want to let these cool uncovered to allow any more steam that is on the potatoes to evaporate. Let your mashed potatoes cool on your counter until they're slightly warm, and then you'll refrigerate them overnight uncovered. This allows your potatoes to release more moisture, and it is key to having very tender lefse that doesn't need a lot of flour and it's easier to roll out. And here we are on the second day, and we're ready to make our dough. Spoon your mashed potatoes into your mixing bowl. I like to use my mixer and just break up the chunks so that it's a little bit easier to incorporate all the other ingredients into my mashed potatoes. In a separate bowl, mix 1 and 1/2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. Mix this together so that it's consistent. Pour this into your blended mashed potatoes and then add in 1/2 cup of heavy cream. Mix this all together until it's smooth and has an even consistency. Test the dough by poking it. If it sticks to your finger, then you'll need to add flour, 1 tablespoon at a time. You want the dough to be a Play-Doh-like consistency. The dough is really thick at this point, so it's best to switch over to your dough hook if you're using a stand mixer. Scrape down the sides to make sure everything's incorporated well. All right, we're all done. And it's time to portion the dough into the ball size that we're going to need for each individual lefse. I prefer to make my dough balls about 60 grams. I find that's the perfect size for rolling and cooking the lefse. If it's any bigger, it's a little bit harder to handle on the griddle. And also, if it's smaller, it's just not a big enough portion of lefse. So I just weigh out my 60 grams all at once, and then I'll show you how to shape these. Take your portion dough and knead it between your hands to remove any trapped air that's inside. Roll the dough into a smooth ball. Then you'll flatten your ball of dough into a puck and then smooth the edges by running the puck along the countertop. This creates a nice even edge for your lefse, and it also helps there not to be any jagged edges as you're rolling out your dough. Once all your pucks are made, you'll cover them and refrigerate them until you're ready to start rolling your dough. Let's talk for a few minutes about equipment. I'm using my Heritage grill, and I've used the same one for over 20 years of making lefse. You'll need a grill that heats to at least 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has a very small lip on the edges so that you can transfer your lefse easily. The next item is my lefse pastry board and cloth. For years, I used a foldable pastry cloth for rolling lefse, and I can vouch for how much nicer it is to roll lefse on this raised board, and it gives a nice cushion as you're rolling. You'll also need a lefse turning stick, which is very flat and has a rounded top. And lastly, you'll need a rolling pin. At a minimum, I suggest that you use a regular rolling pin with a rolling pin sock to help keep your lefse from sticking as you roll. But a few years ago, I bought a corrugated rolling pin, and it is so much easier to roll thin lefse with that signature texture. My pastry cloth is clean, and so I need to season it really well with a lot of flour. As long as you don't have any spots on your pastry cloth where there was stuck dough, you can reuse your pastry cloth and you don't have to wash it every time. Once you're done with your pastry cloth, all you'll need to do is shake out all the excess flour, and then you can fold it up and put it into a Ziploc bag into the freezer. My cloth is completely clean, and so I'm going to put a generous amount of flour on not only my rolling pin and sock, but also my pastry cloth board. Keep on working flour into both cloth pieces, rolling the rolling pin, working some more flour in, and you're going to continue to do this throughout your process of making the actual lefse. This is super, super important. If you don't flour your pastry board well enough, the lefse is going to stick no matter how well you mixed your dough, and it is really frustrating and hard to deal with. Now is a good time to preheat your griddle to 450 degrees. Keep applying more flour to your pastry cloth until you can no longer push any more flour into it and more flour remains on the surface. Once my pastry cloth has all the flour it can receive, I like to take my rolling pin and roll it over the flour just to get more into that rolling pin sock. Now it's time to roll some lefse. Take 3 or 4 pucks out of the refrigerator and set them aside to start rolling. You'll leave the rest of the pucks in the refrigerator so that they stay nice and cold and are easier to roll. Flatten a puck lightly on the pastry mat and sprinkle a little bit of flour on top. You can also flip the puck over just to make sure it's nice and coated in flour and begin rolling lightly. Apply very light pressure as you roll up and down, and then rotate the rolling pin around to keep your lefse in a general circular shape. As I roll, I like to lift up my rolling pin when I get towards the edge of my lefse. This helps to not thin out the edges too much and create more of a scraggy edge. I aim for lefse thickness where I can see the pastry cloth writing through the lefse. Once your lefse is thick enough, take your lefse turning stick and apply pressure down towards your pastry cloth board. Slide the stick underneath the lefse and gently lift it off of the board and place it onto the griddle. Make sure you flour your pastry board between each lefse piece. As your lefse cooks, you can begin to roll out your next piece of lefse. It takes about 45 seconds for that first side of the lefse to cook. You can see little bubbles forming on the lefse that's cooking, and this is perfect, exactly what we want to see. To take a quick peek at your lefse and see if it's cooked and ready to turn, just take your lefse turning stick and gently lift an edge of the lefse up and see the color of the spots on there. Just remember to be very careful because it's very tender, and when you're ready to turn the lefse, you'll want to make sure you're putting pressure down towards the griddle so you don't snag and tear the lefse. The second side of the lefse takes about 30 to 45 seconds to cook. Lay each cooked lefse on a tea towel to cool, single layer. Once cooled, transfer them inside another folded tea towel until you're ready to fold and store them. As I'm cooking my lefse, I have a few tips to share with you. Your lefse turning stick will likely get a little bit of buildup and residue on it as you're transferring your lefse and cooking it on your griddle. To get rid of this, I use a sharp knife to scrape off any of that buildup that forms so that my stick stays smooth while I'm cooking. As you're rolling out your dough, if a portion of your dough sticks to your pastry cloth, you can use that same knife to scrape any dough up that you can. Then you'll generously coat that portion of your pastry cloth with flour and rub the flour into the fibers of the cloth. Then scrape the spot again with your knife to remove any of that flour from the portion of the board and reapply a generous amount of flour to the spot. It sounds really fussy, but any spots that have dough on there can be really hard to deal with, so I find if I can stay on top of it with a lot of flour, there are no issues. My last tip for you is that while you're cooking your lefse, you're going to have loose flour that's going to end up being on the griddle. Every so often, you'll want to use a cloth to brush that flour away. If you don't, that flour will continue to cook and burn, and it will end up on your beautiful lefse. Once you're done cooking all your lefse, it's time to fold and store them. To fold them, just fold each in half and then in quarters. I like to stack 8 pieces of lefse to a quart-size freezer bag, rotating the layers for a nice, neat, square stack. You can store this in your refrigerator for about 5 to 7 days or several months in the freezer. If you do freeze your lefse, it just takes a couple of hours for the lefse to thaw from the freezer at room temperature. And when you're ready to enjoy your lefse, you can warm it in the microwave for 15 to 30 seconds and then spread it with a little butter. Our favorite way to eat it is with a little bit of granulated or brown sugar on it, but it's also perfect with just butter or some rhubarb jam. In this case, I used monk fruit, but it's really good with brown sugar, white sugar, or just butter. But it's so tender. Perfect for any time of year. I hope you guys try it. If you do, or you picked up some new tips from me, I'd love if you shared in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and like. Thank you guys for your support, and until next time, happy baking. Delicious.